In the shadow of mountains, and beside the coast of Cilicia, the fate of two empires clashed. One, a behemoth that had ruled for centuries. The other, a youthful ambition led by a man whose name would echo through time. Alexander the Great. This is the story of one of history's most decisive and dramatic battles, the Battle of Issus. To understand Alexander's greatness, we must begin with his extraordinary upbringing. Born in 356 BC in Pella, the capital of Macedon, Alexander was the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. From the start, he was surrounded by ambition, intellect, and conflict. His mother, a devout follower of mystic cults, instilled in him a belief in divine destiny. His father, a brilliant military leader, laid the foundations of Macedonian power. Alexander's education was nothing short of elite. At the age of 13, he was tutored by none other than Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers in history. Under Aristotle, he studied philosophy, science, medicine, and literature, gaining a deep appreciation for Homer's Iliad, which he kept by his side for the rest of his life. One of the earliest stories that foreshadowed Alexander's future greatness involved a horse named Bucephalus. The horse was considered wild and untamable, feared even by seasoned handlers. But Alexander noticed something others didn't. The horse was afraid of its own shadow. Calmly and confidently, the young prince turned Bucephalus toward the sun, so its shadow was behind it. Then he mounted and rode the horse, stunning everyone watching. His father was glowing with pride, and when Alexander dismounted, he said,
"My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambition. Macedonia is too small for you."
This moment revealed not just his courage, but his insight and ability to lead through understanding rather than force. As a teenager, Alexander already showed signs of exceptional leadership. At 16, he was left in charge of Macedon while his father campaigned. During that time, he crushed a rebellion and founded a city, Alexandropolis. He also fought bravely at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC, commanding the left wing and playing a key role in securing a decisive victory over the Greek city-states.
On one occasion, some ambassadors from the king of Persia arrived in Macedon, and since Philip was absent, Alexander received them in his place. He talked freely with them and quite won them over, not only by the friendliness of his manner, but also because he didn't trouble them with any childish or trivial inquiries, but questioned them about the distances they traveled by road, the nature of the journey through Persia, the character of the king, his experience in war, and the military strength of the Persians.
But Alexander's rise was not without turmoil. After Philip's assassination in 336 BC, possibly orchestrated with the knowledge of Olympias, Alexander moved quickly to eliminate rivals, secure loyalty from the Macedonian nobles, and assert control over the Greek city-states. Many saw him as too young, but he proved ruthlessly effective. He razed Thebes in 335 BC after a revolt, sending a message that his rule would not be challenged. With Greece pacified and his authority solidified, Alexander turned his gaze east, to the Persian Empire. What began as his father's campaign to punish Persia for past invasions now became Alexander's mission to conquer and surpass. While Alexander consolidated his power, the Persian Empire was a shadow of its former self. Darius III, though not lacking in courage, came to the throne through a series of palace intrigues. The once great Achaemenid Empire was plagued by internal unrest and disloyal satraps, yet its size and resources remained formidable. Spanning from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, Persia boasted immense wealth and manpower. Darius, determined to halt Alexander's advance, assembled one of the largest armies the world had ever seen. His plan was simple: overwhelm the young invader with sheer numbers. After victories at the Granicus River and the liberation of Asia Minor's Greek cities, Alexander pushed south through Cilicia. Darius, meanwhile, marched his army north, intent on cutting off Alexander's supply lines. The two forces converged near the narrow coastal plain of Issus, hemmed in by the sea and mountains. Darius commanded an enormous army,
with some estimates being over 600,000 strong. Modern historians say the numbers are more in the range of 200,000 to 250,000. Alexander's forces numbered just 35,000 to 40,000 men. Alexander was clearly vastly outnumbered, by about 6 to 1, maybe more. Alexander knew he needed more than courage. He needed brilliance. The terrain at Issus, however, neutralized much of Darius's numerical advantage. The narrow plain would prevent the Persians from fully deploying their superior numbers. Alexander chose his ground well. By the fall of 333 BC, Alexander had already proven himself in battle at Granicus. But now he marched south through Cilicia, determined to find and defeat Darius. The Macedonian army, though vastly outnumbered, was lean, fast, and hardened from campaigning. Alexander himself led around 40,000 troops, a combination of Macedonian phalanx, cavalry, archers, and Greek allies. Darius, commanding an army perhaps 4 to 5 times larger, estimates range from 100,000 to even 600,000, according to some ancient sources, had positioned himself to crush Alexander before the young king could gain more ground. Darius had marched his forces to Sochi, expecting a confrontation in the open plains of Syria. However, Alexander had taken an unexpected route, moving his troops along the coast and through the narrow passes of the Taurus Mountains. Darius, realizing Alexander was now behind him, panicked. In a hurried reversal, he led his massive army north toward Issus, crossing the mountains through narrow paths that slowed his forces considerably. There, he seized the town of Issus and, crucially, captured some of Alexander's wounded soldiers who had been left behind. In a chilling display, Darius had these Macedonian soldiers mutilated. Their hands were cut off, and they were left to die in agony. It was an act meant to terrify and demoralize Alexander's army. But the effect was the opposite. Alexander, upon discovering the atrocity, was filled with rage. He vowed to bring Darius to justice, not just for the sake of empire, but for the blood of his men. This brutal act would serve to fuel the resolve of the Macedonian troops as they prepared for the coming clash. Strategically, both armies found themselves constrained by the terrain. The Gulf of Issus to the west and the Amanus Mountains to the east left a narrow plain for maneuvering, eliminating Darius's numerical advantage. Alexander recognized this immediately. While the Persians struggled to organize in the tight space, the Macedonians used their discipline and cohesion to prepare for a decisive strike. The days before the battle were marked by tense marches, poor weather, and intelligence blunders on the Persian side. Alexander maintained a relentless pace despite illness, and legend says that when he was gravely sick from exhaustion and drinking cold river water, his physician Philip of Acarnania treated him, while rumors spread of Persian poisoning. Alexander, showing complete trust, drank the medicine in front of his men, recovering swiftly and reinforcing his godlike aura among the troops. Both armies finally met near the Panaris River. The night before the battle, Alexander personally led a reconnaissance mission to survey the terrain. His camp buzzed with anticipation. Many soldiers knew they would face a far larger army the next day, but their confidence in Alexander remained unshaken. As night fell, Alexander toured his camp. He spoke with his men, offered prayers, and reminded them of their victories. To the Macedonians, he was more than a general. He was a brother in arms, a living legend. It is safe to say that many Macedonians were not just fighting for the glory of their country, but for Alexander himself. Alexander also led from the front. He would be the first to charge, the first over the wall when attacking cities. He showed his men that he would face the danger with them. Alexander believed himself to be divinely blessed and sought glory in battle. He had faith that in glory lay immortality.
Darius, by contrast, remained distant from his men. He commanded from a royal chariot surrounded by his elite guard and a lavish entourage. His army was vast, but it lacked the unity and trust. The Macedonian phalanx was the core of Alexander's infantry, a living wall of bristling sarissas trained to move and strike as one. These soldiers were professionals, veterans of multiple campaigns, and the embodiment of discipline. But even the best trained troops need spirit and conviction before facing overwhelming odds. On the eve of battle, Alexander walked among his men, not as a distant king, but as a brother in arms. He called many by name, inquired about their families, and reminded them of their victories at Granicus and Halicarnassus. He reminded them that they were no longer fighting for mere survival. They were writing the future of the known world. To rally their spirits, Alexander delivered a rousing speech. According to Arian and other ancient historians, he said,
Remember that you are free men, fighting not just for yourselves, but for all of Greece. We face men who fight for gold and kingship. We fight for glory, for legacy, for the honor of Macedon and the souls of our fallen comrades. Remember to preserve discipline in the hour of danger, to advance in utter silence, and when the moment comes to roar out and put the fear of God into the enemy's hearts, remember that on the conduct of each depends the fate of all. Our enemies are men who over centuries have led soft and luxurious lives. We of Macedonia have trained in the hard school of danger and war. And what of the two men in supreme command? They have Darius. You have Alexander.
His officers, including Parmenion and Philotas, also addressed the ranks. Parmenion reportedly urged the men to remember the courage that had brought them through hostile territory and to trust in their king. Alexander's charisma was as potent as his sword. He radiated confidence, youth, and destiny. To many of his men, he was more than human. Some believed he was descended from Achilles, others from Zeus himself, and when they saw their king put on his bronze armor, gleaming in the dawn light, and mount Bucephalus at the head of the right wing, they believed no force on earth could stop them. The combination of iron discipline and unshakable morale would prove decisive in the hours to come. At dawn, Alexander arranged his troops with precision. The right wing, under his personal command, would deliver the main strike. The left, under Parmenion, would hold against the Persian cavalry. The Macedonian phalanx formed the core, a bristling wall of 18-foot sarissas, advancing with machine-like discipline. These heavily armed infantrymen, trained since youth, operated as a single, deadly organism. The battle began with both sides launching missile fire across the river. Alexander waited for the moment of weakness, then surged forward with his cavalry. The honor of the right side now became a spearhead of shock and terror. The phalanx advanced steadily behind, pinning the center. Though Parmenion's forces were pressured hard, they held long enough for Alexander to break through the left and turn the tide. Alexander led the charge. With his companion cavalry, he smashed into the Persian left and punched toward the center. This was not just brute force. It was brilliant choreography under pressure. Alexander's direct leadership, his flexible tactics, and the loyalty of his troops allowed him to punch through the larger army. As the battle commenced, Persian archers and cavalry clashed with Parmenion's flank. The line buckled, but held. The shock of the charge shattered the Persian line. Chaos rippled through Darius's ranks. As Alexander drew close, Darius, fearing capture, turned and fled. His royal guard followed, triggering retreat. The Persian army dissolved. Macedonians chased down fleeing soldiers. An army is most vulnerable in retreat, and the Macedonians took full advantage. Darius's mother, wife, and daughters were captured. They believed that they were doomed to a horrible death or worse. Yet, on the contrary, Alexander treated them with dignity and respect, calling them royal women and protecting their honor. Alexander entered Darius's tent and went to the bath area. He unbuckled his armor and said,
"Let us wash off the sweat of battle in Darius's bath."
One of his companions then replied,
"No, in Alexander's bath now. The conqueror takes over the possessions of the conquered, and they shall be called his."
After Alexander admired all of the vast treasures, ornaments made of solid gold, and taking in the smells of perfumes and spices, he remarked to his companions,
"So this, it seems, is what it is to be a king."
More than a victory, Issus was a statement. The old empire was crumbling. One of the most poignant moments followed the battle. When Darius's mother, Sisygambis, mistakenly bowed to Hephaestion instead of Alexander, the king gently corrected her, saying,
"You were not mistaken, mother. He too is Alexander."
It was a rare glimpse into the personal depth of a man, often defined by war. After the battle, Alexander concerned himself with his own men. He made the effort to visit all of his wounded. As well as showing his deepest concerns, he also asked them how they received their wounds and allowed them to exaggerate the tales as much as they pleased. He offered encouragement, joked with them, and praised their bravery. The next day, all the dead were buried with their arms by order of Alexander. Their parents and children back in Macedonia were granted immunity from local taxes. The Battle of Issus was not merely a victory, it was a turning point. Alexander had defeated the Persian king, captured his family, and shattered the illusion of Persian invincibility. The young Macedonian was no longer a challenger, he was a conqueror. Following the battle, Alexander marched south. City after city surrendered. Tyre and Gaza resisted and paid a heavy price. Tyre was besieged for 7 months and ultimately razed. Gaza fell after a brutal campaign. In Egypt, Alexander was welcomed as a liberator. He founded the city of Alexandria, destined to become one of the greatest centers of learning and culture in the ancient world. At the Oracle of Siwa, deep in the desert, Alexander was declared the son of Zeus Ammon. Whether he believed it or used it politically, the divine aura only enhanced his mystique.
His age gives added luster to his achievements, for, though hardly old enough for such undertakings, he was well up to them. There are things generally regarded as rather unimportant, but which are appreciated by soldiers. The fact that he exercised with his men, that he made his appearance little different from an ordinary citizen, that he had the energy of a soldier. These characteristics, whether they were natural or consciously cultivated, made him in the eyes of his men as much a matter of affection as of awe.
Darius sent a message offering all of his empire west from the river Euphrates in exchange for peace. Alexander's leading general Parmenion advised him to accept. Alexander said,
"If I was Parmenion, I would, but I am Alexander and will not."
In 331 BC, Alexander would face Darius again at the Battle of Gaugamela, a more decisive engagement than Issus. Once more, Darius fled. Soon after, he was betrayed and murdered by his own men. Alexander, upon finding the body, gave Darius a royal funeral and hunted down his killers, portraying himself as the avenger of a fallen king and the rightful heir to the Persian throne. With the Persian Empire under his control, Alexander pushed further east. He fought brutal campaigns in Central Asia, marrying Roxana, a Bactrian princess, to unite cultures. But his ambition did not end there. In 326 BC, he crossed into India and faced King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes River. Though victorious, the battle was costly. His troops, exhausted and longing for home, mutinied at the Hyphasis River. Alexander relented. On the return journey, he nearly died crossing the Gedrosian desert. Upon returning to Babylon, he began grand plans. A unified empire, new cities, mixed marriages, and cultural fusion. But he would not live to see them realized. In 323 BC, at the age of just 32, Alexander the Great died, possibly from fever, poisoning, or pre-existing conditions. His body, preserved in honey, was taken to Egypt. His empire, without a clear successor, was carved up by his generals. Alexander's legacy is unparalleled. He changed the world in a single decade, spreading Greek language, culture, and thought across 3 continents. The Hellenistic world that followed laid the foundations for modern science, philosophy, and art. Yet his story remains a paradox. A man who wept when there were no more worlds to conquer, a ruthless warlord and a visionary statesman, a destroyer of cities, and a founder of civilizations. To truly understand Alexander's legacy, we must hear from those who stood beside him, admired him, and sometimes feared him.
He considered nothing impossible to the courageous and aspired to deeds greater than human.
When Alexander led us into battle, we were not afraid. His presence was a force greater than numbers.
We follow him not just because he wins, but because he believes we can do the impossible.
Alexander's reputation continued to inspire centuries after his death. Julius Caesar is said to have wept with envy upon seeing a statue of Alexander, lamenting,
Before Alexander had died, aged just 32, he had conquered most of the known world, and I have achieved nothing.
No other mortal ever inspired such fear in the hearts of kings, or such loyalty from common men.
The earth seemed too small for him. He sought new worlds when there were none.
He endured more than his soldiers, marched further, and demanded from others only what he had already conquered in himself.
And from Alexander himself,
I would rather live a short life of glory than a long one of obscurity.
he was not just a general, he was a myth in the making, a man whose charisma, brilliance, and ambition carved his name into the stone of eternity. From the dust of Issus to the sands of India, Alexander left behind a world forever altered, and a name that history will never forget. Thank you for watching. Please join us next time for more journeys through the world's past. And always remember, those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it.